Chapter 8. Klaus stayed up all night reading, which was normally something he loved to do back when his parents were alive. Klaus used to take the flashlight to bed with him and hide under the covers, reading until he couldn't keep his eyes open. Some mornings, his father would come into Klaus's room to wake him up and find him asleep, still clutching his flashlight in one hand and the book in his others. But on this particular night, of course, the circumstances were much different. Klaus stood by the window, squinting as he read his smuggled book by the moonlight that trickled into the room. He occasionally glanced at his sister. Violet was sleeping fitfully, a word here which means tossing and turning, on a lumpy bed, and Sunny, who had wormed her way into the pile of curtains so that she just looked like a small heap of cloth. Klaus had not told his siblings about the book because he didn't want to give them false hope. He wasn't sure the book would help them out in their dilemma. The book was long and difficult to read, and Klaus became more and more tired as the night wore on. Occasionally his eyes would close, and he found himself reading the same sentence over and over. He found himself reading this. He found himself reading the same sentence and over and over. He found himself reading the same sentence and over. But then he would remember the way the hook hands of Count Olaf's associate had glinted in the library, and would imagine them tearing into his flesh. And he would wake up right up and continue to reading. He found small scraps of paper and tore it into strips, which he used to mark significant parts of the book. By the time the light outside grew gray with approaching dawn, Klaus found out all he needed to know. His hopes rose along with the sun. Finally, when the first few birds began to sing, Klaus tiptoed to the door of the bedroom and eased it open quietly, careful not to wake the restless Violet or Sunny, who still was hidden in the pile of curtains. Then he went to the kitchen and sat and waited for Count Olaf. He didn't have to wait long before he heard Olaf trumping down the tower stairs. When Count Olaf walked in the kitchen, he saw Klaus sitting at the table and smirked, a word here which means smiled, in an unfriendly, phony way. "Hello, orphan," he said. "You're up early." Klaus's heart was beating fast, but he felt calm on the outside, as if he had on a layer of invisible armor. "I've been up all night," he said, "reading this book." He put the book onto the table so Olaf could see it. "It's called Nuptial Laws," Klaus said. I've learned many interesting things while reading it." Count Olaf had taken out a bottle of wine to pour himself some breakfast, but when he saw the book, he stopped and sat down. "The word nuptial," Klaus said, "means relating to marriage." "I know what the word means," Count Olaf growled. "Where did you get that book?" "From Justice Strauss's library," Klaus said. "But that's not what's important. What's important is what I found out about your plan." "Is that so?" Count Olaf said, his one eyebrow raising. "And what is my plan, you little runt?" Klaus ignored the insult and opened the book to where one of the scraps of paper marking the place. "There's a law of marriage in this community are very simple," he read aloud. "The requirements are as follows: the presence of a judge, a statement of I do by both bride and groom, and a signing of explanatory documents in the bride's own hand." Klaus put down the book and pointed to Count Olaf. "If my sister says I do and signs a piece of paper while Justice Strauss is in the room, then she is legally married. This play you're putting on shouldn't be called The Marvelous Marriage. It should be called The Menacing Marriage. You're not going to marry Violet figuratively. You're going to marry her literally. This play won't be pretend. It will be real and legally binding." Count Olaf laughed in a rough horse laugh. "Your sister isn't old enough to get married. She can't. She can get married in the permission of a legal guardian acting on locus parentis," Klaus said. "I read that too. You can't fool me. Why in the world would I want to marry your sister?" Count Olaf said. "Is it true? It's true she's very pretty, but man, a man like myself can acquire a number of beautiful women." Klaus turned the page to a different section of nuptial laws. "A legal husband," he read out, "has the right to control any money or possessions of his legal wife." Klaus gazed at Count Olaf in triumph. "You're going to marry my sister to gain gain control of the Baudelaire fortune, or at least that's what you've planned to do. But when I show this information to Mr. Poe, your play, you will not be performed, and you'll go to jail." Count Olaf's eye grew very shiny, but he continued to smirk at Klaus. This was surprising. Klaus had guessed that once he had announced what he knew this dreadful man would do, would he be very angry and even violent. After all, he had been furious at the outburst just because he wanted roast beef instead of puttanesca sauce. Surely he'd be even more enraged if his plan was discovered. But Count Olaf just sat there calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. "I guess you found me out," Olaf said simply. "I suppose you're right. I'll go to prison, and you and the other orphans will go free. Now, why don't you run up to your room and wake your sister? I'm sure she'll want to know all about your grand victory over my evil ways." Klaus looked closely at Count Olaf, who was continuing to smile as if he had just had a clever joke. Why wasn't he threatening Klaus in anger, or tearing his hair out in frustration, or running to pack his clothes and escape? This wasn't happening at all the way Klaus had pictured it. Well, I will go tell my sister, he said. And he walked back into his room. Violet still dozing on the bed and Sunny still hidden beneath the curtains. Klaus woke up Violet first. I stayed up all night reading, Klaus said breathlessly as his sister opened her eyes, and I discovered what Count Olaf is up to. He plans to marry you for real when you and Justice Strauss, and everyone will be thinking it's just a play. And once he's your husband, he'll have control of our parents' money, and he can dispose of us. How can he marry me for real? Violet asked. It's only a play. The only legal requirements of marriage in this community, Klaus explained, holding the nuptial law, is to show his sister where he learned the information, you're saying I do and signing documents in your own hand in the presence of a judge like Justice Strauss. But surely I'm not old enough to get married. Violet said, I'm only 14. Girls under age of 18, Klaus said, flipping to another part of the book, can marry if they have permission of their legal guardian. That's Count Olaf. Oh no, cried Violet. What are we to do? We can show this to Mr. Poe, Klaus said, pointing the book, and he will finally believe us that Count Olaf is up to no good. Quick, get dressed, and while I wake up Sunny, and we can be at the bank before by the time it opens. Violet, who usually moves slowly in the mornings, nodded and immediately got out of bed and went to the cardboard box to find some proper clothing. Klaus walked over to the lump of curtains and woke up his sister. Sunny, he called kindly, putting his hands where he thought his sister's head was. Sunny. There was no answer. Klaus called out, Sunny again, and pulled all the way to the top folds of the curtains to wake up the youngest Baudelaire child. Sunny, he said, and then he stopped. For underneath the curtains, there was nothing but another curtain. He moved aside to all the layers, but his little sister was nowhere to be found. Sunny, he yelled, looking around the room. Violet dropped the dress she was holding and began to help him search. They looked in every corner and under the bed and even in the cardboard box, but Sunny was gone. Where can she be? Violet asked, worried. She's not the type to run off. Where can she be? Indeed, said a voice behind them, and the two children turned around. Count Olaf was standing in the door, watching Violet and Klaus as they searched the room. His eyes were shining brighter than ever, and he still was smiling a smirk, just like he uttered a joke.